Welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all here to MTRI's November Sit Back Seminar. So my name is Chad Simmons. I'm an ecologist here at the Mercy Tobiatic Research Institute. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting here today in Kespukwitk, one of the 7 districts of Mi'kma'ki, homeland to the Mi'kmaq people. We want to acknowledge the treaties of peace and friendship and thank the Mi'kmaq people for their generosity in sharing their homeland with us. So for anyone who is unaware, the Mercy Tobiatic Research Institute is a research-based nonprofit nestled in southwest Nova Scotia near Kespukwitk National Park and Historic Site. And our mission is to promote, sustain, and conserve biodiversity in Kespukwitk as well as beyond. So today I'm very pleased to introduce Nick Knutson, the volunteer coordinator here at MTRI. And next, I'm going to hand it over to Nick to get started. But before that, I would like to remind everyone to please write any questions you have in the chat bar, and I or Nick will get to them as we can. So with that, Nick.
Very great. Thanks, Chad. And yeah, there's going to be a few times where I maybe ask the experienced naturalists in the crowd what they think of a picture or two. So if you know one of the answers to the questions that I ask, then write it down and give us those as well at the end. Yeah, today I'm here to talk about a project that thanks to funding from the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, we were able to host this year at the Mercy Tobiatic Research Institute. So quick summary of the presentation. I'll talk really quickly about my background and work. We'll talk about the competition, talk about both Kespukwitk and iNaturalist, and then we'll talk about some walks that we hosted. We'll talk about some of the results, some species at risk. So that's kind of like special observations or special observations that we had. We'll talk about some next steps. So kind of where some of this data that we collected is going and how this is kind of advancing conservation in Nova Scotia. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions and discussion, hopefully. So quick background. So I'm an Acadian from Clare, Nova Scotia. And as Chad said, I now work just a little bit east from where I grew up in Kempt at the Mercy Tobiatic Research Institute. I'm the volunteer coordinator there. So a lot of the projects that I work on, a lot of the stuff that I do involves community science or citizen science. And that's a subject that I got really inspired by when I was working on my master's. I'm working with 2 stewards in particular, Alex D'Entremont and Ted Deon. And I always like to kind of give them a shout out as the original stewards who inspired me to get into this field. So now into this competition. So the name of it, it's quite a mouthful, and it gives a lot of description to what it is. So the 2nd annual Kespukwitk Municipal iNaturalist Competition. So it's a friendly week-long iNaturalist competition between the municipalities in Kespukwitk. So then hopefully there are some questions that you might ask yourself. First of all, so in Kespukwitk, so what are we talking about here? So we're really talking about Southwest Nova Scotia. We're giving it back the original name that it had. It's the historical name for Southwest Nova, one of the traditional districts of Mi'kma'ki. And Kespukwitk one of the areas that we at MTRI we work in a lot for a couple of reasons in particular. I guess the main reason is because of its amazing biodiversity and what we can do here. But that's been recognized in a couple of ways. So one way is that Southwest Nova or Kespukwitk is a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. So that's kind of one way that the amazing biodiversity we have here has been recognized. And another way is that all across Canada, 11 sites have been identified as priority places for conservation. And one of those sites is Southwest Nova or Kespukwitk. So that kind of gives some context as to why this competition, is focused in Kespukwitk. So then, the other question maybe, if you're not familiar with iNaturalist, what is this competition? What is iNaturalist? So it's a free tool. It's a tool that I like to promote a lot in my work. It can help you learn both about the species that are around you, while also allowing you to contribute valuable data. So I have kind of a little walkthrough I can go through here in a second, but essentially, you'll take a picture of anything you see in nature, and it'll suggest an immediate ID. You can upload that picture to a database, and experts from around the world can help you identify it. And we'll have a few examples of that coming up. And then you can also just use it as a tool to visualize and learn about what is around you. If we have some extra time at the end, I can maybe share screen just in iNaturalist, and I can do some fun looking around in the province. So iNaturalist, I'm doing a walkthrough for the phone version, because it's the version I find people use the most, and the desktop version I find is quite intuitive as well. It's a lot of the same features. So essentially, you open up your app on your phone, and you have the chance to observe here. You see in the middle, take a picture of anything you'd like to identify. So maybe this plant here, for example. You take one photo, then you have a couple of options. You can take another photo if you like. And in that case, it's good to take all the photos that you think might be useful for observation. So in this case, kind of a close-up of the flower, maybe close-ups of the leaves. So experts can tell me what plant I'm seeing. And then once you're kind of satisfied with the pictures that you have, you can click on what did I see? And the AI function in the app is going to give you a few suggestions. And it's always a good sign if the species has already been seen nearby. So here we have visually similar, but no seen nearby tag. So it's always a good sign if it's both visually similar and seen nearby. Once you've uploaded your observations, experts around the world really can comment on your pictures and tell you what you're seeing. And you can see how many people are commenting on your posts. And if people are agreeing with what you're identifying your observation as, it'll move from casual grade to research grade. And then that's kind of the best quality data for research. So we've spoken about iNaturalist. We've spoken about kind of the focus in Kespukwitk. But now another angle that was really special about this year's competition is that we also hosted walks in each of the 9 municipalities with the help of community reps. And I have to say too, when I say we, I'm talking a lot about me and Chad as well. And we really were kind of leading the way for MTRI with this, and really these community reps were an amazing help, and we're going to talk about that more in a second here. And right off the bat, we'll talk about the walk in Lunenburg, where we can see here. So not an endorsement of the name of this place, by the way. It's a great ecological site, but really, I'd say a priority in Nova Scotia for being renamed, and that was a comment we wanted to make clear as well. But this is a place where Chad was actually supposed to make it, and some things happened, and he couldn't make it, and so we actually had Rachel, who was our community rep in this area, lead the walk in this case. And we spoke to her, and I'm not sure, I can't see now who's in attendance, but if she is here, maybe at the end, she can talk about the walk a bit. But I did hear that it went well, and it was well attended, and the weather was great. A couple of kind of cool observations from the time that they were out there. A hickory tussock moth, which I'm starting to learn is relatively, it's not super uncommon in Nova Scotia, but it's always really great to see it. And a purple pitcher plant, which, as not a botanist, I find all these kind of neat looking plants very cool. And I thought this was a particularly interesting looking one. Next, in Annapolis. So in Annapolis, we partnered with the Clean Annapolis River Project, or CARP, and they hosted a walk with the help of Dr. Nick Hill in the Annapolis Sand Barrens in Wilmot. And again, you can see here kind of the trajectory people took, going kind of west to east and walking back and collecting iNaturalist pins along the way. One of the cool things about that ecosystem is they have a few species that are relatively significant, so they kind of are good indicators for that habitat. And we can see during the walk that, in fact, we had quite a few observations of a couple of indicator species for that ecosystem, both broom crowberry and pine barren golden heather. So Digby, we hosted a walk near the Van Tassels Lake Trail, a pretty well-established trail network, and we were lucky that the Trail Association had just done some upkeep on the trail before we went on our hike. But again, here you can see that we kind of took a haphazard trail or route around the trail, and also there were people contributing observations who weren't on our walk, so you can see kind of a spread out collection of observations there. But on our walk, one of the highlights for sure, I think, was getting to see some blue felt lichen, one of the at-risk species that we have in Nova Scotia. And it just so happens that at this site, the trail goes quite close to some blue felt lichen. So almost everyone at the walk, and we were at least 20, we were all able to kind of get a good look at this pretty rare species. It really is great. And then it was one of the things I learned on this walk. So I thought I'd just included an observation from John, I think here, his username, and some old ghost pipes, which I thought was a fungus. And no, it turns out it is a plant. In Yarmouth, we went to Ellenwood Lake Provincial Park, and the pins here, so fungus pins on iNaturalist end up being pink. So you can see what we were seeing a lot of in Ellenwood. It's a couple of green pins, which are plants, and then basically all fungus. A couple of things we were interested by on this walk. We were really interested to see chaga, not necessarily insofar as it's a rare thing to see, but just insofar as it was strange how low it was. And so this is an example. This is at eye height. So Selena is standing, taking a picture of this. So we had all this chaga kind of growing low down, and we spent a fair bit of time talking about that. And also some smooth lungwort. And we spoke about, lichens being good indicators for pollution on that walk. So I thought some lungwort was a good species to highlight on that walk as well. So in Argyll, we hosted a walk on the Pumnico Coastal Trail, I think it's called, or Pumnico Point Trail. It's right where all of the windmill farm is in Pumnico. And on this walk, we kind of came along, we cut through this kind of marshy area, and then spent a bit of time on the intertidal zone. We had been joined on this walk by members from the Invasive Species Council of Nova Scotia, who actually came on quite a few of our walks with us. It was really great. And on this walk in particular, I remember we spent some time talking about green crabs, and kind of a useful tidbit of information for everyone who maybe wasn't on that walk is, if you're trying to identify this invasive crab as opposed to the other ones, and if you count these, I should know the word, I'm going to say spikes, or points maybe. If you count the points on the side of the crab, the green crab will always have 5. So if you find a crab and you see that it's 5, then you'll know that it's one of these invasive species, and a useful thing to maybe put on iNaturalist. Another, and this is just kind of I just thought it was funny. The name of the species is yellow rumped warbler, and the photo that Mary Kennedy happened to get is of its rump, and I just thought that was kind of funny. When you're making these presentations, you gotta take the joy you can get. I thought that was a good one. And it's good to highlight Mary Kennedy and all the amazing work that she does on iNaturalist in general. So in Barrington, we went to Sandhills Beach Provincial Park, and this was kind of an interesting site insofar as some of the things we saw. We saw evidence that iNaturalist can be used even if what you're seeing is maybe already deceased, or if has it been predated. We can see that Kristen from the Invasive Species Council, observed this northern flicker that unfortunately is no longer with us, but thanks to the experts on iNaturalist, we were able to confirm what it was. And it was great to have Kristen and the Invasive Species Council there on this walk, because we saw a lot of this dead man's fingers invasive algae, which was interesting. And we had kind of a longer Facebook conversation about it afterwards, after this walk. But this was a really fun walk, and the fact that we kind of focused so much on the invasive algae ended up being a fun kind of takeaway for me anyway. In Shelburne, we had a walk at the Islands Provincial Park. So in this park, it was kind of interesting. Right when we got there, we actually saw this invasive species the Japanese beetle on some rows right at the entrance, and then sorry. And then our community rep for Shelburne and Barrington, Gabriel Jones, he's actually quite involved with search and rescue and wildlife first aid, and he rightly thought that it was a useful thing to do to bring us out to this area where he knew of all this eastern poison ivy, and we got to see these kind of amazingly large examples of poison ivy, and we kept our distance, but it was still it was really great. So Queens, the walk that we had was right near the MTRI field station. This is what the field station looks like if you zoom in, and just to the side of it, you can see there's this road, Mount Merritt Road, that goes into the woods. And the walk in Queens, we kind of went down this path and observed some mostly trees in the area. The same observer here observed both trembling aspen and striped maple. And then I thought this maybe was a good chance to get into this, the feedback you can get on iNaturalist, and maybe we have some botanists with us today. But I was looking at some of the comments on this striped maple, and one of the questions we had was, "Is this a subspecies? We've seen it before, but it's so pointy at the end." And so this is completely out of my wheelhouse. I have no idea if this would be a subspecies or if that's possible. But if there's someone here who has an answer to this, then it might be interesting to hear about it at the end of the talk. In Clare, we walked along Matagan Beach, so you can tell here we really, very little inland walking. We followed the shore. But it was really interesting. We found this large colony, or it was known to some of us, this large bank swallow colony. And you can see in the notes, this is my recording, and we were 6 people on the walk, and we all counted how many burrows we could see in the colony, and the average we had was 150. So relatively good way to get a pretty good number, and 150 is a lot of bank swallow burrows. They are an endangered species. And there were some interesting things that we were seeing at this bank swallow colony as well. So there were these burrows that they seemed visibly larger than the bank swallow burrows, and they were also lower down, and it looked like it was more an animal that was climbing in and out as opposed to flying in. So Dan uploaded it as mammals, and he actually had suggested maybe it was an otter. We mentioned when we were on the beach that we thought maybe it could be. We've had some experts come back and disagree that it's an otter, so now we're just kind of stuck on mammal again. So if anyone has any ideas, it would be really great to hear. And then a little bit of extra context for that is that we also had some tracks. So I took a picture of these tracks and uploaded it just as mammal. I really wasn't sure. And raccoon was kind of the suggestion that most people who I showed the picture to had, but it's interesting that we actually had a comment on iNaturalist from someone who seems to know what they're talking about, saying that they really don't think it's a raccoon. So again, if there is someone watching this or even watching the recording who knows the answer to what this track is, it would be great if you would reach out at MTRI and let us know. But we'll come back to kind of what this is and the predation and these bank swallows in a minute. Another really interesting thing we saw, this same colony again, is kind of an interaction between an endangered species and an invasive species. So we saw a lot of Japanese knotweed that was growing right on top of the sandy bank where the bank swallows are nesting. And so this sandy area you can see on the lower left of that photo with the Japanese knotweed is the same sandy substrate that the bank swallows are nesting in. And we're going to come back to this as well, but the root system of Japanese knotweed is really large and apparently quite destructive. And so the impact that having that there might have on the bank swallow is worth studying. And we're hoping that we can get into that a little bit. Okay, so now, we've kind of gone over what the kind of general competition was. We've spoken about some of the walks that we've hosted as a way to kind of kickstart the competition. So now we'll quickly talk about some of the results. So the results for these competitions, we usually split them into 2. First, at a municipality level, there's the number of observations, the number of species observed, and the number of observers within that municipality. And then at an individual level, there are still the observations and the species, but there's another one, which is the identification. So the number of species that you've helped identify as part of this competition too. And that's often part of iNaturalist that gets overlooked a bit, is the work that the people are putting on the back end to come along and actually confirm all of those observations that people are uploading. It's a lot of work. So before a little more suspense for the results. So for the municipalities, really, we're talking about bragging rights here, and hopefully this will turn into a competition that the municipalities themselves will get more into and want to compete a bit and do some more promotion for us. But we did find some pickup on promotion this year. For individuals, we're currently still wrapping up the collection of prizes. So with COVID, we did have quite a few businesses get back to us and say that they have a prize for us, but it's been a little slower to pick them all up and organize that. But we are still doing that. So if you're one of the top 3 for observations, species, or identifications, or if you collected more than 50 species over the competition, you'll be getting an email soon about prizes, I promise. So first, we'll look at the most observations per municipality. So in third place, we have Annapolis. Yeah. I was thinking of having a recording of like a generic cheer on my phone, but then I thought it would get too annoying after all that. So we'll go quickly. Second place, Digby. And this was really close. I think it was maybe 6 observations. So really close race between Annapolis and Digby. But then number 1, we really, Lunenburg this year really showed up. And we can see last year they were in third place and they took that personally. And this year really put on a show and won. Congratulations, Lunenburg. It's really impressive. And Digby and Annapolis as well. To collect 800, 900 observations is really impressive over a week. So now for the most different species observed per municipality. Again, in third place, Annapolis. Second place, Digby, and third place, Lunenburg again. So really, we see these heavy hitter municipalities coming out who really showed up this year. And comparing again to last year, quite similar, but we actually see Lunenburg wasn't even in the top 3 last year. And now this year, they really made a charge. That's great. And finally, observers per municipality, which really is one of the coolest variables I find. It's, how many people are actually there participating, even if it's a little bit. And so in third place, we had Digby. In second place, Lunenburg, and in first place, Annapolis. So a little bit of juggling. We see Queens, Digby, moving around a little bit here. But again, having 65 or almost 65 people participating, that's really great for one municipality. But we're hoping next year we're going to get some of these numbers into the hundreds. But we'll come back to that. All right, so now for the individual categories. And so for this one, I thought it would be maybe useful to just have a quick slide on what it is we're talking about. So observations, it's really the individual uploads of the file that you have, the audio or the audio or video file or photo file of wildlife. Species, it's the number of unique species that you identify. So if you have 10 observations of white spruce, you'd only have 1 species. And identifications is the number of observations that you've helped push towards research grade on the identifying side. So for the observations first, in third place, we have Mark Dennis with 436 observations. In second place, Heather Hahn with 617. And in first place, Mary Kennedy with 636 observations over the course of the competition. Really amazing. And worth noting too, last year we can see most observations. Mark Dennis was in third last year as well. So holding strong here, Mark Dennis representing Barrington extremely well. Now for most species observed, in third place, we have Jeff White, our community rep from Digby. In second place, Mark Dennis again. So really, Mark Mark is an excellent naturalist, one of the top naturalists I would say we have in Nova Scotia. So it's really great to see him participate on these competitions. And Heather Hahn really getting into the race here with Mark. And in the end, 636 individual species observed over the competition by Heather. So an incredible amount of work here, and a well-deserved first place. Thank you very much, everyone, and congratulations for everyone. This is like as many species as I think I've ever observed on iNaturalist, and you've done it in a week. It's humbling. And so finally, the observations identified. So third place, Jeff White again. So Jeff, not only a community rep, not only a representative for most observations and most species, but also a representative for most observations identified. So thank you, Jeff, really for participating in every part of this competition. Second place, Ian Manny, who another one of our wonderful kind of young naturalists making waves in Nova Scotia. And in first place, 578 identifications by Burkhart. And we can see even last year, right there in second place. So thank you very much, Burkhart. Your work is very appreciated, and it's making the data that we're collecting that much more valuable. So that's kind of congratulations to the winners. Really incredible totals there. Really, as I said, I think humbling. And we can see I am here, in fact, with much smaller numbers. But I think it's really cool to be able to highlight the 17 people here who observed at least 50 species, which is really cool. But another almost cooler thing, I think, is the fact that we had over 150 people observe fewer than 10. So we're talking about 1,500 observations there collected by those 150 people, and to collect only 10 is really not that hard. So I find it's an example of both the kind of amazing stewardship you can get with a citizen science project or a community science project, but also the power in numbers that you get as well. So really both cases being exemplified here. So now just a quick project total. So in total, we had almost 6,000 observations of 1,300 species in Kespukwitk, a little over 200 observers, and almost 450 identifiers. This right here is just the top 10 species that we identified the most. And it's a little bit interesting. Quite a few. I thought it was interesting to see that two of the species are bearing. So a good indication for the species that we have that need that, and also interesting to see an American toad there, and kind of unsurprising to see a deer there, I guess. So we have all these observations, this amazing amount of work. But which ones are more useful, and what happens with that? So now that's kind of what we're getting into. And for sure, one of the things with NGOs or with government, with researchers, we are especially interested in observations of species at risk and invasive species. They're kind of buzzwords. They determine a lot of work that we do. But all kinds of observations are useful. And I thought the broom crowberry and the pine barren golden heather are good examples. They're not necessarily species at risk in Nova Scotia. They're also not invasive species. But if you're trying to determine where some of this really rare ecosystem is, the sand barrens in Nova Scotia, these are two species that if you have observations of them, then you're increasing the chances that you are in fact in the sand barren. So, extremely useful observations to upload, because it can help researchers determine where the sand barrens are, which is a question we're still trying to answer, even though they don't fall in the category of invasive or species at risk. So just to kind of give you that idea of course, we focus a little bit more on the species at risk and the invasives, but that's not to say that those are the only observations that are useful. So insofar as invasives, we spoke a little bit about the fact that we're really lucky to have the participation from the Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council at a lot of our walks. They mentioned when they were there that iNaturalist works really well for invasive species. We're talking about species that cause environmental, economic, or societal harm, and when you're working with those species, they're usually so strong once they do establish in a certain area that it's really critically important to know when and where certain species are as soon as you can. And so that's really just the type of data that iNaturalist can give you. And our data that we did collect here did go into a project, an iNaturalist project that the Invasive Species Council is working on, and they'll be able to access our data. And they're currently working on a new list of the invasive species in Nova Scotia. So hopefully we'll get some results soon of how many of those new species we were able to see during our competition. So invasives is one of the kind of categories, definitely a buzzword. The other one I would say is species at risk or species of conservation concern. In Nova Scotia, we're really talking about three groups: endangered, threatened, or vulnerable species. And I was really happy this year. We had 49 total observations of species of conservation concern this year. That's up considerably, more than 3 times. We had 15 last year, and we thought that was great. So to have 49 really was pretty impressive. And you can see that it's covering all of our options, both vulnerable or and not both, but we have vulnerable, threatened, and endangered species covered in what we actually saw. And, and then I just wanted to include this. So if you look at the map of the competition, you'll see that Digby, the shape of Digby is maybe a little bit wonky, and that was done on purpose. We had some people reach out to us who were working at the whale watching tour, and they had some really cool species they'd like to share with us. So we just extended the Digby boundaries a little bit to make sure that we could include them. And it meant that we were able to get this observation of a humpback whale. Apparently, its name is Bayou with its 2021 calf. Always see a whale calf. And I should mention all these three excuse me, observations are from Amy Tudor, the user. She had actually another observation of a humpback whale as well that she called Venom in her notes. And then kind of a pretty special one as well. She actually had a picture of Old Tom, kind of our resident orca who hangs around here in Nova Scotia. And I was interested to see in her note, she wrote Old Tom with an H. And I wasn't sure. I'd always just assumed Old Tom was Old Tom TOM. But it's another thing. If someone knows about the name Old Tom, I'd like to know about that as well. Okay, so kind of the final little bit here before we can ask some questions and have a bit of a conversation. Kind of what's next? So we have all these observations. This is the map of all the province or all of Kespukwitk with all the pins that we collected. We spoke about the fact that we had some endangered species, some invasives. We have some special whales, but like, what are we doing? What's next with this work? And one of the examples I thought we could talk about is come back on these bank swallows. These poor bank swallows, which are an endangered species in Nova Scotia, so that kind of checks one box for us as researchers. They're being impacted by this invasive species, so that kind of checks another box, and it means that we now have a group that wants to collaborate with us. I'm sure that the Invasive Species Council. And then this whole question of predation and what is predating them, and predation on species at risk is an important thing to monitor. And so we are actually moving forward with hopefully monitoring and a habitat protection program in that area. And we've reached out to the landowner who owns that little stretch of shore, and with the help of Université Sainte-Anne and some other partners, we're hoping to set up a little working group that can monitor the colony, study the predation there, and start to kind of think about addressing this Japanese knotweed. This is a photo here of the roots of Japanese knotweed. And you can see just how big and kind of invasive they are. And so to think of those roots in an area where the bank swallows are trying to create these little burrows, and for sure there's going to be some conflict there. And to get into that question and to not, I don't know if it'd be the right thing to just rip out the knotweed. It might destroy the whole habitat, or looking into those questions. So this is an example of how we're taking some of the information that we learned and we're taking it to that next step of actually trying to impact this colony in a positive way. And with that, I leave you again with kind of this table. So these are now the 20 most observed species that we've seen, and a lot of species that if you imagine yourself walking around in Nova Scotia, a heron, a squirrel, wild carrot, pine, maple, oak, a lot of species that you would think of as pretty common, but it's always interesting to see kind of what comes out in these competitions. So with that, I'm not sure if I can see the chat.
So far, Nick, we only have one question, and that's from Susan. And she asked, what does it mean that the dead man's fingers was a research grade observation?
Right. So I can maybe go back to that. I kind of cruised over that section pretty quickly, but when you upload something to iNaturalist, when people are commenting, either agreeing or disagreeing with what you think you saw, as that happens, if people are agreeing, I think if you get two people to agree, then your observation can move into what they consider research grade. And then when you're downloading that data as a researcher, quite often what you'll do is select only the research grade data, because if you start to select all of the observations that no one has confirmed, then you get a lot of misidentifications. So it just means that we identified it as dead man's fingers, and then an expert also identified it as dead man's fingers.
Does anyone else have any questions? Comments?
The Joy is asking the snapping turtle, how much at risk is it? And I mean, this is one of these questions. Oh, no, I can't. Sorry, I have too many things open. I can't. Oh no. So how at threat is it? So snapping turtles, they fall within the group that we affectionately call the herps. So reptiles and amphibians, and generally we're talking about a group that's quite at risk. They're suffering a lot right now. In particular, in Nova Scotia, eastern snapping turtles are listed as vulnerable, so they could still go up to threatened and then still go up again to endangered. But it is a species that you can also put a little star next to, because they actually have a listing, a designation at the federal level as well. So it's not just that in Nova Scotia they're suffering, but also across Canada they're suffering, and honestly globally as well, that they're suffering as well.
Scott would like to say that the tracks near the bank swallows look like muskrat.
Oh, that's so interesting. Thank you, Scott. Scott, would you happen to know, would there be any risk to the bank swallows? Like muskrat wouldn't predate bank swallows, would they? Do you know? Just if you don't know, there's no problem. But thank you for that, Scott. That's really interesting. Hadn't yeah, I was thinking bigger for some reason. And Joy asking, I think you're talking about snapping turtles again. What can we do to their nesting area to help? So, I think that's one of those questions where the answer really is it depends. There's so many potential things that we're talking about here that could be different. But maybe what you could do is reach out to either us at MTRI, or if you're talking about snapping turtles in particular, I know Coastal Action research in Lunenburg works on snapping turtles as well. So another a good group to work out to. But I'd say we're going to need more information about kind of what exactly the area looks like, and what evidence you have that they're there and that type of stuff. So reach out, and it is definitely something that we can help you with. But I think more of an outside of this conversation. Okay, great. In your yard. Oh, that's great. I'm jealous, Joy. I wish I had snapping turtles in my yard. Okay, and Kristen also is suggesting muskrat for those tracks, and she can maybe help confirm if we send some more pictures. That's great, guys. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to get some clarity on this.
Okay, if there's no more questions. So Nick, thank you once again for this talk. It was great. And for anyone interested in our next seminar, it's going to be on the last Thursday of November. So that's the 25th at 7 p.m. And if you missed anything tonight or you'd like to rewatch this seminar, we record all of our seminars and we'll be posting them to our YouTube account. So just keep an eye out for that. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope you all are well and we get to see you all again very soon.
Just a quick note, Scott has told us that in fact muskrats are meat eaters. Another fact I did not know, and so likely they would prey on swallows. That's great, Scott. Thank you so much for your information. All right, thanks everyone.